doing this at such a busy time. I know it's a busy time for all of us, but especially for you, because you've been giving talks and rushing around, and there's the Permaculture Festival. So we're grateful that you're giving us an evening. Thank you. And I also want to say how much I enjoy the magazine. I get the magazine as well. And I've been really enthused by it, into doing things and sharing it with other people as well. Maddy is the co-founder of this magazine we're talking about. And I think co-founder of Permanent Publications as well. I think I'm right. And there are many wonderful books. I've just had one book on sustainable gardening from your collection. And I've started reading that. Wonderful. Thank you. So tonight we're going to learn about permaculture and about rewilding and sustainability, I think. And thank you so much. Thank you. And I'll move off the scene.
Very much.
Whoops.
Thank you very much. So I am going to share my screen, and hopefully you will see this. And we will, I just need, sorry, it's always a little bit, here we go. How's that? Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about permaculture and give you a bit of a definition. And we're going to talk a little bit about rewilding and some of the things that are going on, particularly in my area. And I'm going to begin with a little bit about climate change. I'm not going to talk for a long time about climate change science. I think really now there's been this quantum shift in awareness in the last few years, and the naysayers and the doubters and the vested interest are really close to being drowned out by most intelligent and informed people. So I just want to show you this graph. And this is a graph of the last 400,000 years. And where it culminates, in this instance, this graph culminated in 2016. And I've got an annoying auto slide, auto slide thing that's moving my slides on before I'm ready. I'll try and solve that while we're talking. But this graph culminates at 423 parts per million, which is, you know, an extraordinary amount above any rate that's been known in hundreds of thousands of years. So we are at this extraordinary time in the history of humanity where we have so much evidence that we have not climate change, but climate chaos. And, you know, what has happened in Libya, the droughts that we've had, the change of weather in spring, which has affected our agriculture, all these things are having a huge effect in the world. And of course, in the world, the people with the least often suffer the most. So where there's war and political instability, like Libya, and the infrastructure isn't maintained, there's so much more risk to ordinary people, and their lives are really in peril. On this lovely little island, we're relatively cushioned against the most extreme aspects of climate change, and until really our sea levels start changing. But rather than spending a lovely Friday night with you kind of stressing the awful realities. I want to talk about some of the problems, and I want to take some of the solutions from a very wide sort of perspective. So I wanted to start with Drawdown, which is the work of Paul Hawken. So Paul Hawken is a visionary and a writer, and he began talking to climate and environmental experts about whether they actually knew how to reverse climate change. Did they just know the trajectory of the science? Was there any research available to say what solutions would work best? And the answer was that it was very patchy, and although there were people around doing different practices, there was no sort of clear scientific body of work looking at a collection of solutions and how much effect these solutions would make. So in 2013, he gathered together a whole group of research fellows. They were all scientists, students and scholar volunteers, professors, lecturers, people practicing citizen science like Eric Tonsmere, who's a permaculturist in the States. And he wanted to do the number crunching and analyze and find the 100 best solutions. And that is either ways of conserving carbon or ways of locking it up in the oceans, or specifically actually in the soil. So they looked at all sorts of disciplines. They looked at renewable energy, they looked at the waste system, they looked at agriculture, they looked at some social science and the effect that had on behavior and carbon sequestration. And then they ranked these solutions by net costs, operational savings, and the benefits to society if these solutions were implemented between 2030, which is coming soon, and 2050. And then they calculated how many gigatons of carbon could be reduced. And they used carbon as a sort of currency. So they included obviously all greenhouse gases like methane, which is vastly more destructive than carbon, but they used carbon as the sort of base currency, and calculated things like nitrous oxide relative to CO2. And then they calculated how many gigatons were saved by implementing these techniques globally, how much they would save in greenhouse gas emissions. So, an amazing, positive, wonderful project. And not surprisingly, from what we've learned today, and sorry, I wish I could find my pause button for this, because it will move. Maybe I'll just have to speak more quickly. But not surprisingly, regenerative agriculture scored really rated at 11th in the world. And by that, we mean things like no-till agriculture, not leaving bare soil, so diverse cover crops, in-farm for fertility, so not importing farm, of course, not using fossil fuels to create pesticides and fertility, no synthetic fertilizers at all, multiple crop rotations. So all of these systems are all about, and I'm sorry, I am having a bit of difficulty here. I don't know where the pause button is. Damn. Sorry about this. Maybe that your recording might not be ideal. I might have to come out of this in a minute and go, here we go. Yeah. Just to gather my thoughts. So yeah. Sorry, I'm going to pause this and try and just return the slides. Yeah. Can you see the slide?
We can see a person holding a pineapple.
Can you? How about now? Are we back to Regen Ag?
I'm not, but I don't know if the others are.
Okay. Yeah. Can you put your hands up if you can see the regenerative agriculture slide in the room? Or are you seeing a person holding a pineapple?
Person holding a pineapple.
Oh, great. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. I'm going to have to quit the slideshow and come back in with a better, and yeah, I'm having a technical detail here and I do apologize.
Yeah, if you just end the slideshow and then.
Yeah, I have. And what's happened? Yeah, what happened is my Microsoft has quit.
Oh,
I'm having such fun here. Okay. I really do apologize. This doesn't happen very often, but it really is happening tonight. Right, let's try and see if we can get this to work properly. Okay. Here we go. So
well, I stopped you sharing. You're going to have to start sharing again.
That would help. And it's, how's that? Is that working?
I can't see.
Great. Yeah, you will have had presenter view there, which you don't need to see. Here we go. Let's hope that that we've solved the problem. Are you able to see this?
I can't at the moment, no.
Nothing here either.
Okay, so can you share my screen again?
I've enabled screen sharing, but multiple participants can share simultaneously. So you need to click on the share screen up button at the bottom.
Okay.
And then choose.
Okay. I will do that. I'm very sorry about this. It's frustrating.
There's a sent to try us. There we are.
There we are. Hopefully, I can get the right thing here that won't keep auto moving forward. I don't want it to play, you see. I just want it to.
How about if you go like very bottom?
Sorry?
You go bottom right next to the slider, like to the left of that, there's like that little presenter.
You're right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's hope that doesn't
Might work.
Let's hope so. It hasn't done that to me before, but that's technology. So the idea is that by leaving the soil covered, by no tilling, by having covered crops, by having agroecology, by using agroforestry, by maintaining diversity, not just clearing the landscape of water, having ponds, as you can see in this system, and smaller scale farms, you can vastly increase the intensity of production without releasing CO2 in the atmosphere, and agriculture is one of the biggest emitters, industrial agriculture, of CO2. So it's one of the more significant solutions. This is a picture of holistic planned grazing, and this is another solution that comes up in drawdown. So this is ranked 19th, and this is all about mimicking nature, which is really what permaculture is about as well. So we know that the savannas and of the world are hugely rich, diverse environments, and very, very abundant environments that can support, you know, tens of thousands of animals. And they benefit from the activity of migratory herds that cluster close to each other for protection from predators, and munch grasses to the ground, disturb the soil with their hooves, intermix their urine and their feces, and then critically, they don't stay in the same place, they move on. So this mimics the sort of herbivores of old. If you imagine the bison that used to cross America in extraordinary vast herds, they used to move on, and then the land would be rested. And I don't know if any of you've heard of the story of when they reintroduced wolves into one of the national parks in the US, and how, because the wolves as predators moved the grazing deer on, again, riverbanks recovered, the trees had time to regenerate, the soil didn't get exhausted and overgrazed. It's a similar principle, and a lot of people are practicing this holistically managed grazing with cattle, sheep, even chickens. So moving animals across the land in small paddocks very quickly so that they fertilize and graze and then move on. And so there's this huge movement about pasture-fed livestock kept in holistically managed flocks, not kept in pounds fed grains, but you know, from industrial agriculture, but fed on the pasture. And this is really an ideal, but what happens to the pasture is it vastly changes. The soil becomes deeper, the roots grow much lower, all sorts of nutrients get locked up in the soil, and critically, it starts to reduce CO2 emissions. So this was actually surprisingly, because there's always been this big conversation about methane and cows burping and how that releases a vast amount, but the net effect with pasture-fed livestock is that it sequesters more carbon than it produces. So this was ranked at number 19. And this lovely girl with a pineapple is a little bit more social science. So this is about women smallholders, because many of the small farmers across the world in developing countries are actually women. And it was found that when women farm land, particularly on small holdings, they farm it sympathetically, they create a livelihood for themselves and their families, they generate better nutrition, they often, it increases the financial gain of the family. Children are often able to stay in education longer, and staying in education longer, they're often able to get better jobs, and they marry, particularly the girls, marry at an older age and have less babies. And so purely encouraging women smallholders across the world is it was ranked at what the 62nd most effective strategy for sequestering carbon. And also, you know, encourages the local food system, which again helps lock the carbon into the soil. So, you know, I guess the reason for talking about this is just to say that drawdown, yes, it's about offshore wind, and they did all the calculations with that. They did the calculations with nuclear. They covered almost everything we could think of in terms of environmental solutions. But I particularly liked this one because it was so simple, encourage women farmers, and it has such a good effect. So this beautiful site is a piece of biochar, and I'm not sure how many of you know lots and lots about biochar. I don't know if you want to wave at me, if Matt's waving at me, but is anyone else going to wave at me? Oh, look, there's someone else. Thank you. So you'll know that biochar is sort of supercharged charcoal, and it is like a coral reef. It has an absolutely vast surface area. So this is what it looks like under the microscope. These are different types of biochar. So you can make it out of wood bark and straw and stem and bits of cocoa peat and bagasse. All sorts of different materials can be made into biochar. And the advantages of this is that as they have such vast surface areas, they literally are like terrestrial coral reefs. And then to charge biochar, there's various different methods, and there's methods of scale too, because it can be done on a big sort of productive system, and it can be done in our back garden by taking charcoal and sticking it in your compost bin, or dare I say, weeing on it, and adding nutrients and getting the sympathetic nutrients to start to proliferate. In Belize, a friend of mine puts charcoal into his pig pen, and the pigs do their business and stamp on it and, you know, defecate. And then after a while, he hoofs it out, and then he puts it on his land as fertility. And what biochar does is it locks up carbon. It's an extraordinary substance. And it locks up other trace elements, potassium, phosphorus, trace minerals. It scavenges nitrogen, so it'll suck nitrogen out of anywhere that nearby the air. And then it releases these vital nutrients slowly into the soil and into the plant roots that are growing by it. So we can all use it in our gardens. And I do believe it's sold, well, I know it's sold through a particular biochar peat compost company. But we can make it too, as I mentioned. And so these are some of the little micronutrients and organisms that live in it. Wonderful, in the secret world of the soil. And our knowledge of soil has been extraordinary. The way it's just exploded, even in the last 10 years. You know, it's completely changed our perception of this amazing living system beneath our feet. But the point of this slide is that biochar has all sorts of ways of not just being something that we make in our back garden, perhaps, to increase our own crop fertility and our happier vegetables and happier plants, but it can be used in agriculture, because it can be made from waste materials. It can be put in buildings to sequester and lock up carbon. It can be put into products. There are cosmetics with biochar in it, packaging material, livestock feed even. I mean, it has an amazing application. And this is just, you know, one of the sciences come products in the world that if we really want to do something, we need to look at this and see it as a big carbon solution. Now this is, and I'm going to go home in a minute to Rewilding very quickly, but this is one of the last most inspiring sort of broad scale global solutions that are possible. So Brian von Hersen is a Californian. He used to be a systems engineer consultant. He's also a permaculturist. And he now devotes his life to finding ways of reversing global warming by restoring the primary production of oceans using kelp and other seaweeds. So what he wants to do is really reverse some of the terrible destruction of the oceans. We all know that oceans face a very dire situation. They are saturated with CO2, that we can't absorb any more carbon dioxide in our oceans. They absorb half of the carbon dioxide recaptured from the atmosphere, and this creates acidification and over 90% of the heat caused by global warming. And we know that coral, for instance, this year has had a massive die-off. It's been on the news, and ocean deserts are expanding. So Brian wants to restore marine life in subtropical waters by creating thousands of kelp forests in what he calls marine permaculture. And the key technology is to create marine permaculture arrays, which are lightweight lattice structures, roughly half a mile in size, submerged 80 feet below sea level, which he then attached kelp to. These structures are attached to buoys and they rise and fall with the sea level. And this powers pumps that pumps up colder, nutrient-rich waters from the deep. The kelp then soaks up these nutrients and grows exponentially. And this then creates a sort of trophic pyramid rich in plant and animal life. It cools the ocean. It allows the plankton to bloom. And when the plankton bloom, you know, the small fishies come in, but so do the vast plankton feeders, you know, and like the whales, basking sharks, and they poo in the water and release even more nutrients, which sort of cascade down and feed the system again and again. So from deserts, from overheated deserts, he's creating these wonderfully fertile marine environments. And any plants that die off sink to the bottom, and they have sequestered carbon, which then stays inert at the bottom of the ocean for centuries. So imagine these floating kelp forests, billions of tons of carbon dioxide, whilst providing, you know, sequestering billions of tons, whilst providing all sorts of wonderful byproducts. So of course it encourages fish and restores fishing systems, but we know also that kelp has all sorts of other applications. So, you know, kelp's used in all sorts of commercial products. It can be made into animal feed, it can be made into human foods as well and added for our own nutrition. It's a remarkable substance. So marine permaculture is about creating foods and an income stream, but also critically about restoring ocean habitat. And I know that I think last year Brian von Hersen was given $1 million to continue to develop the marine permaculture idea. So this is the last slide about drawdown. But what it shows you is the how these different 100 solutions are divided across the board. So you'd think maybe materials and buildings or having hybrid cars might be an important solution. But what you're seeing here is that energy is highly significant. Food is possibly our food systems, reducing waste, plant-rich diet, silver pasture, so trees and pasture together, regenerative agriculture, tree intercropping, all these wonderful agricultural techniques that need to become taken up in every country of the world. They are highly significant. And then what we do with our land, how we preserve and conserve our peatlands, our temperate forests, our tropical forests, again, very significant. But also here, this huge pink zone, which is all about the education of girls and family planning. So being a way of reducing carbon for the reasons I explained earlier. But I'm going to move on now and just give you a very sort of across the board definition of permaculture. So it's an innovative framework for creating regenerative ways of living, a practical method for developing ecologically harmonious, ethical, human scale and productive systems that can be used by anyone, anywhere. So this was my home in the 90s, or my back garden. So I looked directly out over this is a field of barley. And when the tractors came past with their spraying booms or their little white granules of fertilizer, they'd often come into the back garden. So this is about 1993, and this is by 2008. So we managed to get hold of a third of an acre of this land, and we converted it into wildflower meadows and a forest garden full of 60 fruit and nut trees, climbing edibles like hybrid berries, and raised beds, no dig vegetable beds. The little person crouching in on the right is actually someone filming from the BBC. It did really well, and I'm happy to say we have moved on, but it has a wonderful guardian who's looking after it for years to come. And what's significant about this is when we moved there was no birds hardly flying over. There was nothing in the soil once we acquired this land in the early 90s. That we had no worms. We had an explosion in the first years of growing of plantain, and our apple trees that we planted had chlorosis from lack of nutrients. Tried very hard, though we did, to restore the soil. The soil had been utterly hammered and was dead. And but by 2008, it looked like this. And when we left in 2021, we actually had blooming orchids that had come through and were they were early purples, but were growing in the top part of the meadow, which was a real testament to how the land can be restored in under 20 years from being completely dead into something productive. And we got a vast amount of food from this garden while we were living there. So that's an example of sort of forest gardening and larger meadow gardening. And of course we had lovely things like common lizards, which aren't so common, and so forth. But we left and we moved to Devon. And so this is my husband, Tim, lurking in our woodland in North Devon. And the woodland itself has just about every native tree that you would expect. It used to be a woodland pasture, and it's had been left pretty much since the beginning of the 20th century to restore itself into a broadleaf woodland. And we followed a permaculture principle, which is all about just observing mostly for a year. Don't do anything, observe. Because we'd gone from chalk downland, very alkaline soil, into acid, rainy North Devon, and we had an enormous learning curve that we needed to undertake. So we watched and we listened, and we watched the season turned, we made notes, we did surveys, and we started on this big learning curve of learning how to coppice as well, and just the wood hasn't really been coppiced since I think about the Second World War. So some of the very large coppice stalls are falling over and will die unless we do something. So we have done minimum gentle coppicing, which you'll see from the handcart. That was our wood for the winter after. But one thing we did do fairly early on was that we made a woodland pond, and woodland ponds are deliberately like scrapes in the soil. They're not great deep things that with sheer edges. They are gently gradiated. Our friendly farmer offered us the opportunity to come and excavate. This was a pond that had been silted up over years, and he came in the middle of the drought in our first year in 2021, and he dug it out. And my goodness, what an amazing transformation, even in a year. This is an ephemeral pond, so it does dry out pretty much in the last few weeks of what is our latterly hot summer. But that means that newts can't take up residence, and it's not a pond for fish. And this is a great advantage because it gives rain to things like diving beetles, and it allows frog spawn and toad spawn to thrive in the early months of the year with no fish or newts eating all the spawn. And so we've had this incredible sort of exodus from the pond into the garden of literally hundreds and hundreds of frogs coming out of the woods to very kindly look after my vegetable garden and eat my slugs. So one of the aspects of rewilding is this idea that we need to bring water back into the landscape, and I'll show you what that means. But one of the reasons for doing this is because it encourages insect life, and when we have insect diversity, we have beautiful songbirds. And this is a pied flycatcher. They're not as rare as spotted flycatcher, but this little fella was in our garden calling for a mate earlier this year. We do have spotted flycatchers which are on the red list, but they're charming birds, so beautiful, and I'd never seen one before. So I just felt like we've heard so much about species decline and the collapse of biodiversity, and it's about having wild areas on the land, in the garden, and about bringing water into the landscape, even in small ponds. This area on our land is not mature woodland. It's actually an area that was conifer, and it was felled in 2015 and allowed to naturally regenerate. And this is the most fascinating example for me of nature at work, natural succession. The only thing our previous owners of the property did was put up a fence on the north side, and that's been enough to deter deer crossing across the land to such an extent that they browse all the saplings. And we did a 20-metre quadrant survey earlier this year, and we found that the Forestry Commission has requirements for, if you fell productive woodland, you need to replace productive woodland. And we found just in 8 years, we've already got 80% of the required amount of oaks, 80% of required amount of hazels, 100% of required amount of woody shrubs like willow, and 3,300% of silver birch because it's a pioneer. And yes, actually 100% of native willow, which is much more appropriate than planting rowan and wild cherry, which they specify, which really wouldn't work on this land because it's too damp. So no one quite knows how well natural regeneration works. It's something that needs far more research, but what we understand at this stage is you get this succession. So you clear fellow woodland, the weeds come in, the brambles grow up. The brambles then protect the seedlings from browsing deer. And we have red deer the size of horses here, as well as roe deer. And they are like a nursery environment for these pioneering birches and woody shrubs, things like holly actually counts in that category. And then once they get away, you start to get the beginnings of a mixed ecosystem, and then the oaks start to blow in and seed in from the surrounding woodlands, and there's enough cover in the area for them to get away over the head height of deer, and then you've got a naturally regenerated woodland without any planting, any plastic tree guards, and any tree stakes. So at the moment, we're working with the Forestry Commission to watch and see whether we need to spot plant more oak and protect it. But at the moment, we're okay, and we're allowed to carry on rewilding. And one of the amazing aspects of the rewilded area is we did a bat survey using a citizen science portal and a bat detector, and we picked up this little fella, and this is a barbastrel, which is on the red list. It's one of our rarest bats in the UK, but in Europe as well. And we also picked up dormice, evidence of dormice in this area. So it just goes to show 8 years of natural regeneration, and you can create habitat for the rarest of bats. There was a host of other bats, also, you know, pipistrelles, serotine, brant, all sorts of species, but this was our notable rare species. And also grey long-eared bats, which are also rare but not as endangered as this lovely fella. So rewilding has all sorts of aspects to it, and I won't give you too much detail, but I just want to say in North Devon there's 2 farms that are rewilding. Oh, interesting. Sorry, I don't know what's happening here. And one way they're doing it is letting pastures grow and not manage them with grazing, and then mimicking mammoths. So cutting down and bulldozing Sitka spruce, which is past its sell-by date anyway, and then making these huge piles. And in these piles, the deer don't get in to browse, and you start to get wildflowers growing. The other thing they're doing is they're creating ponds. So our little modest woodland pond is nothing. This is a 23-acre field with 23 ponds. And they vary from large ponds with a beaver enclosure to little scrapes. And the effect of it is quite extraordinary. You know, I saw clouds of goldfinches, 40 at a time, flocking across this landscape. So many insects, a bit bitey actually in midsummer, but so many birds and insects. And the owls have come back in and are hunting here. There's small mammals in the grasses. barn owls and tawny owls quartering, and birds of prey. It's an extraordinary environment. And here's an example of wildflower regeneration. So bringing back the wildflowers into these what they call improved pastures, which are clovers and rye, and proliferating and getting the species back into this environment, and creating all these nectar sources for insects, which feed the birds, which feed the birds of prey, and create habitat for mammals. And they've also planted thousands and thousands of trees along the edges as well. And this is Tom, who's a biologist, talking about wildflower regeneration of pastures. And I mentioned the B word. So this is this iconic shape of evidence of beaver in beaver enclosure. They introduced on this farm particularly a couple of beavers, a male and a female, for the first year in 2019-20. They just got used to the place and they built numerous dams, and it was only the next year that they began to have kits. This is a fence enclosure. It's all done under license, and this is not one of their beavers. This is a beaver that was saved from the Tamar Valley. There's still so much prejudice around beavers being destructive. They're actually ecosystem enablers. They create floodplains which stop water rolling off the land and flowing into our concrete human urban environments. They create abundance, all these naturally made ponds create incredible abundance. They kickstart ecosystems. They're incredible creatures. Beautiful. And this is Derek Gow. He is the beaver man of Devon. He's the only man I know who's got a room on his farm called the Vole Room. And that is because water voles are another really endangered species. And he has bred 32,000 water vole and helped them be released all over Great Britain to try and restore populations of the vole that's been destroyed by mink, escaped mink actually in the environment mostly. And they're lovely little creatures. They are not rats, as Wind in the Willows might say. They are voles, very gentle. And he's also experimented, you can see the size of his wood piles to create habitat for invertebrate. Rotting wood, as we know as wildlife gardeners, is the thing. With rewilding projects, it's done on a massive scale. And these are Connex horses, which are wild horses that he's experimented with grazing. And I just want to say something a little bit about what he says. Rewilding doesn't imply doing nothing. We reintroduce apex predators or keystone species like beavers. We clean up rivers with leaky dams, riparian buffers. So that's tree systems and shrub systems along riverbanks. We let rivers escape from the tyranny of being culverts in straight lines, and we allow them to meander across our landscapes once again. We don't want to get rid of water. So when I built our pond, Tim actually broke the land drain that he found in the pond. In that field of 23 ponds, as they systematically found land drains, they destroyed them. We want to keep the water on the land. So making land damp regenerates woodland, which then brings back brings back species like swallow, martins, and swifts. Once we've got ponds, we have mud, and then they can build nests. And as I mentioned before, shallows and deeps provide toad shelter and all sorts of varieties of creatures. So the other thing is to return grassland, improve sprayed grassland to meadow, and allow some areas to become scrub and then regenerate into woodland, as we have on that 2 acres. And cut hay not for silage, because when you cut for silage, you cut it very early in the year, which doesn't give ground nesting birds time to fledge. We want to cut it for hay and then holistically graze it. And then we want to start reintroducing species like this gorgeous creature. We haven't had storks living in Britain since about 1416. I think the last pair died in Edinburgh in the early 1400s. We ate them all, basically. And these are wonderful, wonderful, iconic social birds. You'll know that Knepp Estate in Sussex are the first ones to have reintroduced them, but we also have storks in Devon, care of Derek Gow, on a couple of farms now. They're still in enclosed environment, but they're going to release a couple of a year. But they're so sociable; they tend to stay close to their groups, and they don't feed on fish and destroy fish farms. So these are some of the things that are happening in this wonderful world of regenerative farming, rewilding. I mean, I haven't really even talked about permaculture, but there's only so much you can squeeze into the time, and it's time I stopped. But if you want to know more, please do subscribe to Permaculture Magazine, like Matt and Barbara. We're currently at 118 issues, and every time you subscribe, you have access totally free of charge to our back issues, which are all searchable by subject. We've also got free ebooks, so books about all sorts of interesting subjects, from foraging to gardening, and they're all free downloads. We have all sorts of articles which we post online at permaculture.co.uk, and we make videos and release news and reviews. And you can find those totally free of charge on our website and our YouTube channel. You just look for Permaculture Magazine. And I checked the other day, and we've had over 5 million views on YouTube. And there's a whole variety of subjects there. So that's my book. So I get told off if I don't give myself a plug. And that is really more stories in this vein of regenerative, positive stories about regenerative land and culture, and really hope we do have solutions. We just need somehow to create the deeper and greater awareness that they're out there, and champion them and push them and talk to people about them. And say, you know, we have the science, we have the living examples, we just need to have the will and the policy changes to implement them. So I want to say thank you very much. And I know it's quite late, and I've tried to be as succinct as possible, but has anyone got any questions? Oh, there's a lovely cat's tail there. You might have to come off mute. Yeah, brilliant. And I can leave my. Can you see me? Have we come out of the share screen?
Yes, we can see you.
Brilliant.
Rescue.
There's a wild creature on the screen.